Hey, it's Brian from Mighty Startup, and today we're doing another viewer Q&A. And as you guys know, I'm here to help you build your supplement brand by navigating FDA and FTC requirements. So let's get to the question, and it asks, Brian, I'm a small company with limited funds. It feels like the regulations are overextending itself and that it's asking us to do more than we should. I guess I'm also asking the question, do we have to follow all of the GMP requirements? So really good question. What I want to avoid in terms of my response is that it's the law, that the regulations build in food safety and food manufacturing practices in there, and that your distributors and retailers are going to expect you to follow the regulations and the laws. And the reason why I want to avoid that is because, yeah, that's all true, but I don't think it's a really good answer for you. I think the reason why a lot of people ask me, like, Brian, why do we have to do all this? Do we have to, right? We're a broker, we're a small company, whatever the situation is, they're always asking, do we have to? And I think the crux of it is they just don't understand, like, why are all these requirements in there? What value or purpose does it serve? I think that's really the essence of the question, rather than someone trying to weasel their way out of the regulations. At least that's my interpretation. So let's instead look at the scenario as if you have a problem with your product. Okay, and I'm going to just make up an equation as to how we solve for these problems. Let's just say your product has an issue. Someone got sick, they got salmonella poisoning, went to the hospital, and now FDA is after you, and they're trying to figure out, brand owner, where did your salmonella come from, right? You need to go investigate, root cause this, and then correct this and make sure it doesn't happen again. That's essentially what they're going to ask of you. It's like a problem, right, that you need to solve. Where did the salmonella come from? And so for the purpose of visualizing this, let's just say in order to solve for X, which is where the salmonella came from, you have to apply an equation, right? You need to figure out all the missing elements of this equation that's going to help you solve for X. So let's just say the equation is AB plus CD times E. Okay, where A is the master manufacturing formula, B is the batch production record, C is the QC release of your raw material, D is your retention samples, and E is the sanitation or cleaning practices of the facility. Okay, so if you were to solve for X, meaning you need to go find out where the salmonella came from, well, you have to go look at your master manufacturer, right? That formula, that is A, first thing. Now, if you don't have one, then right away, A is unknown, and that means you can't prove that your formula was consistent through every batch because you're not documenting that, right? We don't know how much lot number one in terms of the inputs are for that formula versus lot number two because we're not documenting it. We don't have a master manufacturing formula. With that line of thinking, you go to the next variable, which is your batch production record. Well, let's look at that. Well, I can't see it because there's nothing to see. I don't have a batch production record because I wasn't following that requirement. In that case, I can't see which ingredients you added, what the amounts were, which operator added those ingredients. I can't see what lots of the ingredients were added. So, that hinders me because I don't know what ingredient lots to test for to get more data. And so essentially B becomes an unknown. Then we look at our QC release of our raw materials. Well, that means you have to go and test your raw materials as part of your regular operation. And if you're not doing that, then what? Again, it's another unknown. I have no idea what C is going to tell me because I don't have any data. And then D is the retention samples, right? Retention samples, if you're new to this, is just the requirement of you having bottles of every lot that you've made. So if you've made 6 batches, you should be keeping, a few bottles, 3 bottles, let's say, of each of those batches. This is in the requirements. These are your retained samples, your retention samples. And the value of having retention samples is that you can test it if there's an issue, and that could help defend you in a situation. For example, if FDA found salmonella in your product, well, you can test your retention samples and say, look, I tested my retention samples and there is no salmonella. Now it's your word against theirs, right? So there's value in having the retention samples. And if you're not following that, well, you can't do any sort of investigative work using those retention samples. And then lastly, E is the sanitation practices. And this is you cleaning your facility or having your manufacturer ensure that they're cleaning their facility and documenting that, right? And if you're not documenting that, how do I know if you're actually doing it? Yes, you could be doing it. I totally get it. But if you're not documenting it, it's really hard to prove. And sometimes people forget things, and maybe you were off one week and you're relying on the memory of your staff, and that could be an issue, right? And it just creates more questions than it does to help you figure out where did salmonella come from. And if all your variables are unknown, you can't solve for X. You can't find out where the salmonella came from. If you don't know where the salmonella comes from, you can't fix it. You can't prevent that issue. You're just guessing as to where the salmonella may have come from. And assuming FDA is going to be okay with that, that means you may be producing more product thereafter, hoping that you've addressed the salmonella issue, but you just never know. And maybe your passing results are just a fluke, right? You really don't know because you don't know what the root cause was. Right off the bat, a lot of these requirements, what I'm trying to convince you of is that it's providing practical value when things go bad, right? Yes, it's providing the food safety piece, and yes, it's the law, and it's very prescriptive for a purpose. It's just that some people don't see that. They just don't understand that. So hopefully this frame of mind or this perspective helps show you another way of looking at the value that it does bring. And just before we go, one last quick thing, and that is, look, your consumers don't care about your manufacturer. They don't care about your ingredient suppliers. They care about you, the brand owner, because they are attached to your brand. And to them, if you have an issue with your product, they're going to be wondering, what did you do to fix it? What are you going to do to not let it happen again? And why did you let it happen in the first place? Like, those are the big three questions that you need to answer to your consumers. That's their expectation. You better have a really good answer for that, right? And I think this idea of, do we have to follow the regulations? Do we need to do this? Do we need to do Y? Do we do X? To your consumers, they want to make sure you're following all the rules, and you owe it to them because they're the ones invested in your brand to explain how you're going to fix this issue. And so having followed the regulations is going to help you get there faster, right? Solve the problem, fix it, and make sure it doesn't happen again faster. And you have a good narrative, good story, good message to tell your consumers. But if you don't do those things, it's going to be really hard for you to solve for that. And I just had a thought, and I think a lot of you are asking, like, Brian, why can't I just rely on my manufacturer to do this, right? Why do I have to check in on them? Well, it goes back to that point that the consumer only cares about you as the brand. They don't care about your manufacturer. And the other thing is that the reality is that there's a lot of manufacturers out there that aren't doing a good job, right? There are a lot of manufacturers out there that are getting warning letters, that are getting recalls. And so the due diligence falls back on you to make sure you're finding the right suppliers, whether that's your ingredient suppliers or your manufacturers or your warehousing, etc. It falls back to you because you are the brand owner. And so, yes, you do want to make sure you're following all the rules. And in some cases, I understand the company is small, you're limited in resources, you're limited in funds. That's fine. You still want to follow the rules, but you just scale it down so that it fits your model, okay? There are some deal breakers in the regulation, like if you can't get this, you shouldn't be putting product out there. But there's also a lot of room to move. There's a lot of variation here, variability, depending on formula matrix of your product, the size of your business, where you're distributing. All of these things have a role in helping you scale appropriately so that it is reachable and achievable to comply with all the regulations. So I'm going to leave it there. Hopefully you found this useful. If you have a question or thoughts, please let me know in the comment section down below. I'll talk to you later. Cheers.